Gwen, thank you so much for joining the discussion today. I'm really excited to talk with you about some things that have been happening with Amazon in the last few months, and then kind of what we can look forward to between now and the end of the year, as much as we can figure out what that might look like, since this has been a pretty unpredictable year. So maybe to get started off with, you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you became an Amazon guru.
Thanks. I have been in the e-commerce world for well over 20 years now. I learned to make a website in college and studied art and marketing. So I was immediately thrown into what we now call digital marketing from the very beginning of my career in book publishing was where I started. And it was funny because I remember one of my first book editing meetings. One of the editors had discussed that a book title needed to look good at this size on an Amazon's page back then. And she said if it couldn't be recognized or read at that size, it was no good. And that was probably like 1999. So, you know, we've come a long way from there, but Amazon was on everybody's minds back then as well. So I've worked in a variety of consumer products, service, agency roles, manufacturing, in the digital marketing realm, you know, kind of working about what we now call e-commerce or digital marketing. More recently, I worked for a US manufacturing company, and there I was in charge of building out their entire direct-to-consumer business. And when I did that, that's when Amazon really took over my world. Like, it was the most explosive growth of any division of our direct-to-consumer market. We transformed the manufacturing company. We tripled its size in 4 years.
Wow.
And we built them into a mid-seven-figure company, you know, in that time frame. So it was a great experience. And, you know, as we started to have that success, we had a lot of other, you know, starting with local companies come to us and say they were either terrified of Amazon or they were on Amazon and they were frustrated and they didn't feel like they were being successful, and how could we help them? And that's where we formed Lineage Marketing as a consulting company to help others, essentially.
Okay, so 2020 so far. Right now, when you and I are talking, it's the end of July. So talk about what 2020 has been like up until this point. So January seems like decades ago.
Yes.
You know, what happened right when, you know, the US and I think worldwide went into lockdown in March, and then what have you seen since then? What are some things that have stood out during that time?
In retrospect, January and February were pretty typical. You know, we were seeing kind of the typical growth curve on Amazon, and everybody's businesses, you know, is pretty predictable on what you could plan for on inventory or anything else. You know, all the conferences were talking about, you know, your typical various like new ways to market. You know, I mean, Amazon's becoming more mature, so the competition, like, it's more expensive to do things. It's harder to get a new product to stick than it used to be. You know, I think at that point we were seeing a little bit more of a paradigm shift where, you know, your traditional top consumer brands had never really done that well on Amazon, and they were starting to do well. I think Amazon on the back end was starting to promote them more and give them more space, you know, to compete a little more heavily against their competition. So before it was easy to get ahead of those products, and now it's a little bit more difficult because not only do they have the brand recognition and the marketing dollars, but they're getting additional supports and attention that they didn't traditionally get.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, you know, I think that was a little bit of a shift early in the year. And then COVID hit. And, you know, we really kind of, everything went down into lockdown. Life as we know it on Amazon really changed with that. From a consumer perspective, Amazon always meant fast, 2-day reliable shipping, and that disappeared overnight. So, you know, that's a whole thing because that's their core value proposition. And what we kind of saw on the back end, I mean, there was across categories, we saw a lot of changes when COVID hit. Anybody in the food category saw their sales soar.
Mm-hmm.
They blew through their inventory. They were doing really well, and they did not get restricted on sending. They were considered essential goods and were able to send in inventory. Although some of them had ship dates that were pushed out a month from Amazon,
Wow.
which some of them consequently saw sales drops because of that.
Yeah.
And it was SKU by SKU. There was no rhyme or reason to it. Some of them had plenty of inventory in stock at FBA warehouses. So we don't really understand why, they had such long lead times. But at the same time, we saw a lot of shift to people's websites. So people's website traffic was also through the roof because suddenly people could buy things and have it shipped faster from a brand's individual website than they could from Amazon.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
just
I think
turning everything upside down.
Right. So I think we saw a lot of consumer behavior change during that period. And we also saw more people starting to buy grocery in general. And there's actually been a lot of good research done on this of, I think grocery was up 60%, 160% year over year in March. And then I think it's down to about 35% now. But it's still like more people started buying grocery and developed a habit, and they expect it to kind of stick. So what we've seen as an agency is more food companies have come to us because now they want in on Amazon, and they want, and they're paying more attention to their websites because now they aren't getting a lot of them had, restaurants and grocery stores that were buying their products, and that demand dried up. So what was doing well for them was their website and potentially Amazon. So they've shifted a lot of resources into these businesses, and it's growing substantially.
We're in July. Normally, we would have Prime Day.
Yes.
That didn't happen this year.
Yep.
Tentatively, it's pushed to October. So what does that look like? What are some consequences of moving Prime Day from July to October, both on sales during the summer and then what's going to happen in the fall? What do you think that looks like?
So I suspect that Prime Day was where it was in the calendar because I think it was Amazon's slowest sales period of the year. So I think traditionally across industries, it was a slow sales time. Kind of coming off of the 4th of July weekend, people want to be outside, they want to be swimming, they want to go on vacation, and they're not really thinking about buying things. So we've usually seen across products that, depending upon the seasonality of each product, June and July can slow down, but on Amazon, July always kind of started spiking back up, and it was really kind of where the growth chart started trending up for the year. This year without Prime Day, we saw a very suppressed second week of July, which is where Prime Day usually is. We kind of saw a higher, we saw a little bit of a bump on the third week of July, and it's kind of, coming back down again this week. So it's one of those things that I think everybody's going to be down this July from where they've been previous Julys, unless they're just got a COVID bump in general as their business.
What do you think the consequence is of moving Prime Day to October so close to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, whether it's in terms of supply chain issues, getting that inventory in? Is there an anticipation of kind of wearing out customers? Can we kind of spike sales so close to one another, or are things just going gangbusters for e-commerce overall so well that there's not really a fear of that? What are you seeing in the companies you're working with right now?
From Amazon's perspective, to begin with, I don't know if they're ready, because I still don't see the ship times really fast to indicate that they're ready for a huge sales surge. But in terms of clearing out their warehouses for, Q4, September, October, the different times that they've thrown around for Prime Day would be a great time to clear out a lot of inventory in their warehouses to make room for the seasonal warehouses. That's not necessarily to the seller benefit, that's to Amazon's benefit.
Right. Yeah. If you're trying to stock up, but clear things out. Yeah, those two things can't really happen at the same time. So
Right.
yeah.
The hard part always, although we've had a little bit of predictability in the past, from the seller standpoint, is knowing when Prime Day is going to be. They usually don't release the date till about a month ahead of time. They've kind of done that traditionally through the years. And it's hard to plan, especially if you're somebody who's bringing inventory from overseas or have a long lead time, when you don't know what that date is with a longer lead time.
Yeah.
And if somebody was to plan and bring an extra inventory now for that October date and Amazon doesn't go ahead with it, they're going to be bogged down in inventory. I think, anybody who's responsive and can get inventory quickly, it won't be that big of a deal in terms of the date and timing. And I know, we might talk about some other stuff that plays into making this more complicated than in a traditional year.
Yeah.
I think people will see a bigger October if it happens. October is usually a great month, not as great as November or December, but I think we'll see a bit of a boost, and maybe October will be more like a November number.
Interesting.
Than in previous years.
Yeah, definitely. Looking ahead again to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, with such a crazy year where so much has changed, what are you anticipating with Black Friday, Cyber Monday? What's going to be the same as before, and then what's going to be different this year that hasn't applied in the past?
So, the biggest thing for everybody is the inventory restrictions that Amazon's put in place. So I think on July 13th, they launched some new rules about inventory. The first thing is they've done a SKU by SKU maximum limit on how much inventory somebody can send. So, regardless of how much you send, I think right now they're allowing you to send in 200 units. That's the minimum. So every seller can have up to 200 units of an individual SKU, at least what I've seen across our accounts. So then if it's a higher volume item, they've raised that. I do know that for some people who experience very large seasonal surge, they're not yet seeing Amazon allowing them to have the amount of inventory that they typically see in a seasonal surge, which I don't know if that will change as it gets closer. Amazon hasn't really indicated where those numbers come from. They say they're based on historical performance, but are they really looking at year-over-year performance, or are they looking at trailing 90 days, which is always what they preferred to do. Yeah.
Wow, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, and they haven't shared the back end of how they're thinking about this. So, I don't know how people are responding, but everybody has to kind of weigh it out. And we don't know yet if Amazon's going to adjust it. So say you're a new seller, or you have a SKU that, let's say 200 units is fine for you for the moment, but you start to see your inventory demand surge. Are they going to allow you to send in more? Or are you going to be capped at that 200? We don't know how often they're going to revisit that number. Then the other thing that they've done, which is pretty substantial, is a couple of years ago they launched something called the Inventory Performance Index. So it's kind of a measurement of how you're doing, and it takes into effect a couple of criteria. How much excess inventory you have. What's your FBA sell-through rate? So how many times you're turning that inventory in 90 days, and how much stranded inventory you have. So that means it's not associated with an active SKU. So it could be that it's got a bad barcode on it, or, you've closed the listing and there's still inventory sitting in their warehouse. So when they launched this, the number was 350. If you were under 350, you suddenly were only allowed to have a certain cubic volume available to you at the FBA warehouse. And for any inventory that you had over that, there were really heavy fines imposed on you for that space. And then you weren't allowed to send in additional inventory over that limit.
Yikes.
And if you don't fix your score, they lower that cubic volume, and it can spiral out quickly.
It sounds pretty aggressive.
So traditionally what that was that score kind of looked at the trailing 90 days. And this January, they changed it with very little notice that they were raising the bar from 350 to 400. And then they started to look at historical performance. So they started to, and we don't really know what that means. They just said historical performance. We're hoping year over year.
Okay.
So that's great for somebody that has a large volume of volatility in their inventory performance. It's not as great for somebody who's a new seller who's trying to figure out the ropes and make some mistakes. You know, like if you're guessing your initial inventory and you get it wrong and you're overstocked, you don't have much time to fix it. And that's going to punish you for a really long period of time.
Yeah.
And we've seen that happen. And the other issue with the historic number is when you make changes and you fix the things that you need to fix, it doesn't write itself. You don't see that immediately reflected in the scores. We're not even seeing that reflected 6 months out in somebody's scores.
Wow.
Like we'll see it go up a little bit, but like they can't cross that green threshold if they were bad 7, 8, 9 months ago.
Wow.
So when recently, you know, and they changed it so that they've moved that bar now to 500. So people that were completely healthy before, you know, by Amazon's own measurements, are now considered unhealthy. And they've given them till August 16th to fix the scores, or they're going to impose inventory limits on those sellers. It's not enough time for anybody to make any substantial changes. So, you know, people can do all these efforts, which is to Amazon's benefit, right? They'll clear out more space in their warehouses, but it's not actually going to help any of those sellers unless they're very close to that number. So, you know, that was kind of a shock to our world. And definitely. It's going to really impact, all these things are going to really impact how sellers can prepare for the sales surge for the fourth quarter. So my guess is people aren't going to be able to take as much advantage of fourth quarter demand as they usually do. You know, they're just not, unless they can replenish really quickly. You know, Amazon's a lean company. I don't know if you're familiar with lean practices, but it's, you know, where you don't carry a lot of inventory. You want things to just, as a customer orders something, you want something coming in behind to fill that order. So that's sort of where they want to get everybody. Is, you know, it's called a pull system versus a push system. So they want to get everybody to the point where you're stocking as people are ordering. And I think that's what people are going to have to do in the fourth quarter. Not everybody's set up to do that. Not the whole supply chains aren't set up to do that for everybody. But the better you are able to operate lean and resupply Amazon on a frequent basis, the better you'll be able to take advantage of the sales.
In the before times, we would think about seller fulfilled Prime as something that worked well for really high price items, oversized items, things that might have special handling instructions. You know, it is sort of our other category of things that might be an option for seller fulfilled Prime. So given the limits in how much inventory can be sent in, what the fulfillment turnaround time is, are you seeing any of your merchants that have been doing FBA switch over to seller fulfilled Prime as a way to just move their items out faster and have greater control over their inventory, or is that not something they're considering?
First, seller fulfilled Prime is not an active program at the moment. So like the people who started in it are active in it, but there's been a wait list for new entries for a long time. And I think this week the wait list was taken down.
So definitely not active. Okay, so if you weren't doing it, and it's not really an option at all, is what you're saying.
Yes, and one of my contacts at Amazon said there's not a meeting at Amazon that doesn't go by where it isn't brought up, because it would solve a lot of issues for a lot of people, even internally. But my guess is that there were a lot of obstacles and challenges with that program that they haven't figured out yet with the initial people they tested it with. So that's not really an option for a lot of people. They can do fulfilled by merchant, which is generally more expensive for a company to do by product, when you're looking at your profit analysis, just because you can't really pick, pack, and ship an item for less than Amazon does in most cases.
Yeah.
But right now you can beat them in most cases on shipping timelines.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, Amazon is so far behind on most products that, a seller with a normal shipping time frame can usually beat Amazon. And if they have a solution with the warehousing or distribution in more than one shipping zone, then they can really do well. They can meet those 2-day timelines and meet that threshold, and they can do fine. And that is a way around all these inventory issues, with FBA at the moment. We do see there's a lot of food that prefers to do fulfilled by merchant because it's a perishable product, and Amazon doesn't practice FIFO, the first in, first out. So, they end up even if they keep a really good turn on their inventory, they still have to throw out a lot of stuff that Amazon just nobody bought from that warehouse.
Yeah. Oof, that's rough.
So, and then there's also challenges people have with needing frozen or refrigerated storage space, which Amazon doesn't have. So there are a lot of options out there. There are a variety of 3P sellers. The company Deliver has gotten really popular with people because it's not quite as cheap as Amazon, but it's fairly cheap.
Yeah.
If you don't have this, then they can get you into the zones. And some of these 3PLs have seller fulfill Prime. So if you hook up with some of them, you may be able to get that Prime badge.
It could be a way in, perhaps. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
And there's also consortiums like the company Kahoot, that where people just band together and they use a similar software and they send inventory to each other's warehouses and then can send stuff out from there. So, that's another option for people if they don't have a footprint in multiple markets, is they can join something like that and, benefit from ground shipping everywhere, but it gets to people fast.
Okay, so Prime Day coming up, always a huge opportunity for people. What kind of tips do you have for optimizing what merchants can really get out of that day?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that people can do. So the very first thing is they can do nothing, right? Even doing
I did not expect that to be one of the options. Okay, go ahead.
Even if you do nothing, you're going to see a sales boost on that day, and you're also going to see a higher conversion rate. So you will sell more products on Prime Day, no matter whether you plan for it or not.
Okay. Good news.
Yeah, I mean, it's good news for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Then you got to think about, like, what is your strategy? So more established products, products that have done really well, they have really good sales rank, they may want to just kind of back off a little bit for Prime Day. They might want to reduce their ad spend or target their ad spend really specifically at bestsellers or less competitive profits or products. Or consider what time they want to do it, if they want to actually turn their advertising on after other people have spent through their budgets, with the later ad spend. That's always a good way of protecting your margins as everybody else gets really aggressive on price and advertising on that day. Newer products are in a different boat. They might want, if they want to gain traction on that day, they might want to boost their ad spend to gain exposure and sales rank. It's a great time if you have overstocked items or closeouts to offer a deep discount and advertise to unload those products and get rid of them. The other thing that people can do is they can always prime the pump. So, like, say they don't want to be really aggressive on Prime Day, they can be really aggressive and offer big sales heading into Prime Day to get into a really good sales rank, and then just ride the organic lift of Prime Day as it happens. And they can do that, like, through lightning sales or big sales or, offsite advertising, all sorts of things. So it's a couple different strategies.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thank you for sharing. That's really great. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was really great. I learned a ton.
Yeah, thanks for being supportive.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Have a great day.